Okay, so we're recording now. So this is what I thought we would do today. The Torah readings for Shabbat and Sunday, for the 2 days of Sukkot, we go outside the regular cycle of Torah readings and read what's allotted for the holiday. And that's from Leviticus 23, a description of the sacred occasions to be celebrated throughout the year. And frankly, there's not much really deep there to really talk about. So I thought maybe we would look at the Haftorah that is designated for the first day of Sukkot. And let me just mute everyone now. And of course, if you have a question to ask, just go to the chat to type in a question or unmute yourself to interrupt and ask a question. We have a small enough crowd that we can do that, but keeping yourselves on mute the whole time. Somebody asked about the presidential debate. The only thing I'll say is that should have been on mute a lot of the time last night. Okay. So like I said, I thought we would take a look at the Haftorah for the first day of Sukkot, which in the Eitz Chaim, if you have the Eitz Chaim, is found in the back on page 1253. If you have another edition of the Chumash, that like the Hertz, the blue one, or some other Chumash, you have to look in the table of contents for where the Haftorah for first day of Sukkot is listed. Or if you have a Bible, you're looking at the prophet Zechariah, and it's or Zechariah, depending on how it's spelled. He's the last prophet of the minor prophets, and it's the last chapter of his book, chapter 14. Okay, so yeah, that hurts Chumash there, Barbara. You have to look in the table of contents to find first day Sukkot Haftorah. So Zechariah chapter 14, the last chapter of his book. So what I thought we would do, let's just read it in English. There's something that we haven't done really for Torah study, other times of reading a lot of the Torah portion, rather just the commentaries. Let's read the English, and then we'll take a look at the commentary that's on page 1252 that kind of explains a little bit about who Zechariah was. The name Zachary in English today comes from Zechariah in Hebrew. Okay, so I'm on page 1253, chapter 14, verse 1. Lo, a day of the Lord is coming, when your spoil shall be divided in your very midst. I should say the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, shekitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. For I will gather all the nations to Jerusalem for war. The city shall be captured, the houses plundered, and the women violated, and a part of the city shall go into exile, but the rest of the population shall not be uprooted from the city. So Zechariah, I'll just pause here to say that this, I will gather the nations to Jerusalem for war. So we might be familiar with this from the Haftorah for the end of Passover, where, is this it? It is, yeah, I think from, not the intermediate, 7th day of no, 8th day of Passover. No, there's some other, maybe this is the Haftorah I'm thinking about how the time of Sukkot is supposed to be this prophetic time in the future, in the time of the Messiah, where there will be this war of this apocalyptic war of Gog and Magog, traditionally, like Armageddon is taken from the town of Megiddo, where in central Israel, this war is supposed to take place among the nations that will then lead to the time of the Messiah. And that's supposed to happen around the holiday of Passover. So that's what Zechariah is referring to here. Then the Lord will come forth and make war on those nations as he is wont to make war on a day of battle. On that day, he will set his feet on the Mount of Olives near Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall split across from east to west, and one part of the mount shall shift to the north, and the other to the south, a huge gorge. If you've been to Jerusalem, and perhaps on a tour you've been to the Mount of Olives, try to picture in your mind's eye what Zechariah is referring to. The Mount of Olives is to the east of the old city of Jerusalem. So when you see on the news a picture of Jerusalem, often that picture is taken from the top of the Mount of Olives. There's a hotel up there, which is technically in Palestinian East Jerusalem. And that hotel is a fancy hotel. A lot of journalists go there for whatever meetings and whatnot, but it has a beautiful view. There's a panorama there of the old city. You see the Dome of the Rock, the gold dome there, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the grayish dome, and a beautiful view of the city. But what's important for Jews is that there's a Jewish cemetery, a huge Jewish cemetery on the western side of the Mount of Olives, again, which is to the east of the walls of the old city. Okay, so his picture here is that the mountain is splitting, half of it to the north, half of it to the south, with a gorge in between. Okay, so just picture that cemetery. So in other words, the more common approach to the Kotel is to walk from the Jewish quarter. So if you could picture that, if you've been to Israel, if you've been to the Jewish quarter, you kind of leave the Jewish quarter, and there are all these stairs to go down to the security entrance to get into the plaza area of where the Kotel is. So at the top of those stairs, there's another beautiful vista of the Temple Mount, and behind it, you can see the headstones in the cemetery on the Mount of Olives. And you can see that hotel, I think it's called the Arches Hotel because there are 7 arches up there.
Intercontinental.
The
Intercontinental Hotel.
That's it, the Intercontinental.
And the view is that you're describing is behind me.
Okay, there you go. Very good. So, yes, right, beautiful. So the other view from the Jewish quarter, you could see it the other way. You could see the Temple Mount in front of you first, and then behind it, the Mount of Olives, the cemetery, and on the top of the Mount of Olives, the Intercontinental Hotel. There are 2 other vistas of Jerusalem. You can go where Mount Scopus is, where Hebrew University is. There's a promenade there, and you're looking from the north south to the old city. And the other one is the Haas Promenade, where a lot of tour groups go to when they first enter Jerusalem. And there you're south of the old city, looking north. So you'd have the Temple Mount on one side to the left and Mount of Olives on the right in front of you. So all these different vistas. Anyway, the Mount of Olives is important here for Zechariah's vision of this war and the Messiah. So the Mount of Olives is splitting into 2. Verse 5, and the valley in the hills shall be stopped up, for the valley of the hills shall reach only to Azal, or Atzal in Hebrew. It shall be stopped up as it was stopped up as a result of the earthquake in the days of King Uzziah of Judah. So mentioned, and the commentary mentioned in Amos chapter 1 is the earthquake. And the Lord my God with all the holy beings will come to you. In that day there shall be neither sunlight nor cold moonlight, but there shall be a continuous day. Only the Lord knows when, of neither day nor night, and there shall be light at eventide. Okay, so normal day and night is going to be very different in this day. So the Mount of Olives is splitting. The valley, some other valley, the Valley of Etzal, we don't know what that is going to be shut up, and day and night will stop. In that day, fresh water shall flow from Jerusalem, part of it to the eastern sea, and part to the western sea, throughout the summer and winter. Now, the eastern sea might be the Dead Sea, because to the east of Jerusalem, down the hills to 2,000 feet below sea level, 2,000 feet below sea level is the Dead Sea. So that would be to the east. To the west is the Mediterranean. That's what he's talking about, the Western Sea, which is in Hebrew is Hayam Ha'acharon. So which is the last sea. So in biblical times, they didn't know of anything beyond the Mediterranean. They did know all the way to the end of the Mediterranean, as we talked about with the book of Jonah, when Jonah hopped a ship to Tarshish. Most agree that there was a Phoenician colony. The Phoenicians lived in what is Lebanon today. There was a Phoenician colony in what is today southern Spain, around Gibraltar. So the people of the biblical Middle East knew about all the way to the end of the Mediterranean, but they didn't know beyond. They didn't know that the sea beyond that was called the Atlantic, and they didn't know, of course, anything beyond that. So that's why the final sea, the last sea, or what's here translated as Western Sea, is the Mediterranean. Verse 9, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day there shall be one Lord with one name. Bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad, ushemo echad. Taken right here. So that's the idea. God, there'll be one God over all the earth, and everybody will proclaim God as the one God. Then, verse 10, so the mountain is splitting, Mount of Olives is splitting, the valley is shutting up, there's no day and night, and fresh water is going to flow from Jerusalem. No such thing. There's a spring that if you've walked through it, also if you've been to Jerusalem on a tour, especially with family tours, you can walk through Hezekiah's tunnel. So in the time of King Hezekiah, which is a couple hundred years before Zechariah's time, there was a siege of the city of Jerusalem by the Assyrians, and Hezekiah ordered his engineers to find a way to dig a tunnel that would connect a spring that is on the southern, outside the southern part of the city of Jerusalem, outside the walls, to build a tunnel to go into the city so that the city can be provided with fresh water. So that tunnel exists today. You can walk through it. It's beautiful. It's a lot of fun to do. And you see there, if you're paying attention, like a little plaque that the workers chiseled into the wall saying, here we are, the workers from one end inside the city, the workers on the other end from the spring met right here in the middle. So that's the only way fresh water flows into Jerusalem. There's no such thing as fresh water flowing out of Jerusalem. There's no such thing. So this is another miracle that's going to take place. Some spring is going to be planted there in Jerusalem so that fresh water comes from it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then the whole country shall become like the Arava, from Geva to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. The latter, however, shall perch high upon where it is, and shall be inhabited from the gate of Benjamin to the site of the old gate, down to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. Never again shall destruction be decreed, and Jerusalem shall dwell secure. Okay, so it's a vision for Jerusalem sitting on high, and these references to the different gates there, we don't really know about that, which exact gates in the old city he's talking about. As for those peoples that warred against Jerusalem, the Lord will smite them with this plague. Their flesh shall rot away while they stand on their feet. Their eyes shall rot away in their sockets, and their tongues shall rot away in their mouths. Just a note that on Sukkot, we're commanded in the book of Deuteronomy, V'hayita ach sameach, you shall be really happy and joyous. So reading this verse 12, not sure how that coincides with the message of the holiday of being joyous and happy. It's like you're watching a video game, I don't know, a creation of zombies or something like that, the flesh rotting away, their eyes and tongues. In that day, a great panic from the Lord shall fall upon them, and everyone shall snatch at the hand of another, and everyone shall raise his hand against everyone else's hand. Judah shall join the fighting in Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the nations round about, vast quantities of gold, silver, and clothing shall be gathered in. So this fighting is happening. All the spoils, the wealth is coming to Jerusalem. The same plague shall strike the horses, the mules, the camels, and the asses. The plague shall affect all the animals in those camps. So everything's going to die. All who survive of all those nations that came up against Jerusalem shall make a pilgrimage year by year to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, and to observe the Feast of Booths. This is why this is chosen for the Haftorah, because it mentions Chag HaSukkot right here, and that all this is going to happen on Chag HaSukkot. Any of the earth's communities that does not make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, shall receive no rain. However, if the community of Egypt does not make this pilgrimage, it shall not be visited by the same affliction with which the Lord will strike the other nations that do not come up to observe the Feast of Booths. Such shall be the punishment of Egypt and of all other nations that do not come up to observe the Feast of Booths. In that day, even the bells on the horses shall be inscribed, Holy to the Lord. The metal pots, right, so the Kohen has a, usually the Kohen Gadol, I think, in the book of Exodus is described as wearing some headpiece that says Kodesh Ladonai, or Kadosh Ladonai, holy to the Lord. So even the bells on the horses, so the horses are going to wear something that says holy to the Lord. The metal pots in the house of the Lord shall be like the basins before the altar. Indeed, every metal pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holy to the Lord of hosts. And all those who sacrifice shall come and take of these to boil their sacrificial meat. In that day there shall be no more traitors in the house of the Lord of hosts. Okay, so this is Zechariah's vision. Frankly, I've never read it in English before. I've only kind of followed along in the Hebrew and kind of been thinking about what's happening next in the service. So frankly, I haven't paid attention to every verse in this Haftorah before. And I must say that it's quite bizarre, this vision here. It's not unusual, this vision of the Messianic future. I mean, what we do read on Passover, on the 8th day of Passover, as a vision for the future, is Isaiah's famous vision. In that day, the lamb shall lie down with the wolf. A child is going to lead all these animals, right? So there is something that's happening that Isaiah says, that Zechariah says, that Ezekiel says, that a lot of prophets who have a vision of the end of days and the coming of the Messiah talk about cataclysmic things happening and things going against the laws of nature, right? So an animal that is a hunter and an animal that is hunted will no longer live according to their instinct. They're going to live together in peace and just eat hay or straw. That's Isaiah's vision. Here, there's no such thing as night and day. There's some spring is going to well up in Jerusalem. So there's a thought there that Jerusalem, it's supposed to remind us of the Garden of Eden. Back in Genesis, Eden was the place where all the rivers flowed from. like all the rivers of the world originated in Eden, and all the water is flowing out of it. So this idea of a place of the source of all water, source of life, that's what Garden of Eden paradise is like. That's what Jerusalem is supposed to be like. There are some rabbinic midrashim that suggest that Jerusalem is the place where the Garden of Eden was. So there's a lot of midrash about the Temple Mount, what happened there, and it might be the place where Cain and Abel fought. So lots of things in the Torah are associated, and with Garden of Eden and other things are associated with Jerusalem to give it this mythical kind of location, not like a compromise kind of, it's not in anybody's territory, which in King David's time, it was Jebusite territory. So all the tribes of Israel had their allocation in the land of Israel. So where would the capital city be? Well, it wouldn't be fair for one tribe to claim ownership of the capital city and the temple. So that's why David conquered the city from the Jebusites and got it. It's kind of like the District of Columbia being carved out as this neutral territory for the United States. This idea, so that one state can't say, "Oh, we get to have the capital in our state." Okay, so that's that. So I wanted to look at the commentary that's on page 1252 to kind of get at some of the ideas that are contained in this Haftorah and how it connects to the holiday of Sukkot. Like when we're supposed to be happy on Sukkot and be building a sukkah to kind of get a sense of dependence on God, why this messianic vision? Why is this associated with the holiday of Sukkot too? So I'm reading the commentary. This reading is one of the latest examples of biblical prophecy. Dating from sometime after 518 BCE, it originally concluded the visions and oracles anthologized as the prophecies of Zechariah. Okay, so 518 BCE is after the Jews returned from exile in Babylonia, and were in the process of rebuilding Israel and rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. So Zechariah is one of the last three prophets in the history of prophets in the Bible. It's Haggai, Malachi, and Zechariah, who are those last three who prophesied into that community that returned from exile. So this is where this is taken from. This Haftorah is marked by a strong tone of impending doom and purification. Okay, we got the doom sense, this war, people dying of plague, etc. A repeated emphasis on that day of divine judgment conveys a tone of expectation and inevitability. Okay, so a close reading of, if certain words repeat, what kind of impression we're supposed to be left with from that. And so on that day, this will happen. On that day, Zechariah keeps saying here, so as if it's destined to happen. The city of Jerusalem stands at the center of these prophecies, having a pivotal place in the wars to come and in the universal pilgrimage proclaimed for all nations. When the battles conclude, the Lord will be acknowledged king, and all the peoples will be invited to celebrate the festival of Sukkot in Jerusalem. Okay, so at the core, the reason why the rabbis chose this is because of the mention of the holiday of Sukkot. But there has to be a deeper connection to. The rabbis wouldn't just pick this just because it said Sukkot in it. There has to be more to it. This Haftorah begins with the siege of Jerusalem by all the nations, and it ends with their survivors being invited to Jerusalem for a sacred convocation and worship at the Feast of Sukkot. Looting and plunder give way to a forecast of the security of Jerusalem and its religious centrality for all. Marking this transition as a shift from the wars of the Lord and his army of holy beings to the peace of Jerusalem, in which even the most common objects and utensils will be holy to the Lord, right? So we saw that when we read through it. Significantly, little is said here of the Israelites themselves or of their worship, whereas much is made of the nations who will bow before the Lord in Jerusalem year by year, which is interesting, right? The focus is on other nations and the war that's taking place and how the survivors will then year after year come to Jerusalem to acknowledge God as God and also to observe Sukkot. The elevation of the Lord as king over all the earth is clearly of major concern to the prophet, as is the centrality of the house of the Lord for all nations. In that day there shall be one Lord with one name. The immediacy of the forecast is registered by the repetition of the word day. Okay, so let's go on to the next paragraph. Beyond the terrifying clamor of battles and death, Zechariah envisages a time of unearthly splendor, a day when there shall be neither sunlight nor cold moonlight, but there shall be a continuous day. Creation is therewith reversed and transformed. God's first light will shine again and evermore without setting or dawning. In this era, heavenly splendor will illumine all things. It's a time of God's universal kingship. So that's an interesting sense too, not just that verse 9 that says on that day, Bayom Hahu Yeh Adonai Echad U'Shmo Echad, but there will be this universal light, kind of like from the creation of the world. So things will be going on in the world that will remind us of creation and God's sovereignty. Along with the elemental quality of light, Zechariah's prophecy focuses on the life-saving nature of water. It comes to first expression through a prediction that in the day that is coming, fresh water shall flow from Jerusalem to the eastern and western seas throughout the summer and winter seasons. This image harks back to Ezekiel's vision of a stream of water issuing from below the platform of the new temple and flowing outward to heal the natural world. It recalls the primordial streams of Eden, which I mentioned, and dramatizes the temple as a veritable paradise at the center of the world. Zechariah's Zechariah's prophecy of Jerusalem is nourished by this mythic figure. So you have light and you have water, two essential things that you need to live. However, as an image of earthly bounty, the blessings of streams and flowing water derives from regions like Mesopotamia, nourished by underground fountains and mountain torrents. Ancient Israel, where the waters above the heavens were the decisive source of sustenance, right, needed rain in Israel because there were no rivers, was not such a place. The prophet Zechariah therefore speaks to all when he promises God's heavenly bounty of rain to all those who will worship the Lord in Jerusalem on the Feast of Booths, which is why we pray for rain at the end of the holiday on Shmini Atzeret. And the connection to the agricultural meaning of the holiday, which is the time to bring in the fall harvest and to pray for rain so that the next harvest will grow and be bountiful. So the rain here connects to the holiday of Sukkot too. And the water as well, because on the holiday of Sukkot, each day we read of the special offerings that were brought each day of Sukkot. In the book of Numbers, it says that. And there was a libation of wine and also water every day. So there was a celebration of the water drawing festival that would take place during the holiday of Sukkot. It was a time of great, it's like carnival. There were jugglers, and the Mishnah talks about rabbis juggling and doing other kinds of entertainment in Jerusalem to kind of celebrate the water and the festival in general. So the relation of the Haftorah to the calendar. This Haftorah shows an old connection between the festival of Sukkot and rituals for rain. Any of the earth's communities that does not make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bow low to the King, Lord of hosts, shall receive no rain. This pronouncement excludes only Egypt, a land that does not depend on rainfall, which is promised as an appropriate scourge. Rain rituals associated with water libations and with the four species gathered on Sukkot are mentioned separately in early rabbinic sources. Some of these rites may go back to early biblical times, but only during the era of the Second Temple do they seem to have been integrated into a multi-level service of celebration and supplication. So it's interesting that the commentary doesn't really focus on this war that is taking place, this apocalyptic war that's supposed to happen on Sukkot. It's more about the end result, about water and the focus on Jerusalem being a source of water for the world now, and rain that will fall and as a source of blessing that also will occur on Sukkot. So it's for that reason, I think, for the rabbis developing the later water rituals connected to the holiday, that they also chose this prophecy for the Haftorah for the first day of Sukkot. So any questions or comments about this unusual? Yes, Paul.
Yes, I'm always reminded of the end of this Haftorah, where it says, "In that day there shall be no more traitors in the house of the Lord of hosts."
Yeah.
The last time I walked to the Kotel, you walk down a series of steps.
Yeah.
First thing I see is a guy playing the saxophone asking for donations.
Yeah.
Next up, somebody selling a bunch of kippot.
Yeah, or the red threads to...
yeah, exactly.
Right, yes.
And I'm reminded of this, no more traitors in the house of the Lord of hosts.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and there's no commentary on this. Let me see. I have this other book with me here, which is the Jewish Study Bible. So it's essentially the JPS translation with Bible scholars adding commentary and introductions. So let me just see what it says about the traitors. Oh wait. So Malachi is not the last book of the prophets. Zechariah is not the last book, but Malachi is. And no, this commentary doesn't say anything about the traitors. It's interesting why they don't say anything about that. Well, there is a footnote. So in that day there shall be no more traitors, and there's a footnote B, and B says to sell ritually pure vessels. So the scholar who is writing about the book of Zechariah suggests that what the traders are doing, it's not, regular household items. It's something that you'll need to go to the temple. So perhaps what he means is that all the land will be holy and everybody will have holy objects. I think that's what that means, because like the context is even the horses are going to be wearing bells that say holy to God, right? So everything, you don't have to worry about, oh, I don't have something holy in order to enter the precincts of the temple, right? Because the entire, there's a lot of rabbinic literature, a lot of stuff in the Mishnah that says, you're supposed to bring the tithe, you're supposed to bring first fruits, you're supposed to bring other sacrifices for whatever reason to Jerusalem, but you have to do so in a state of purity. So there are all these mikvaot, plural of mikvah, at the entrance to the city of Jerusalem so that you can become pure to enter the city. And then there are all these other facilities available to trade your non-holy objects for holy objects to be used in the Temple of Jerusalem. So I think that's what Zechariah is talking about from context here. In that day, you don't have to worry about that because the whole land and everything in it is going to be holy. So we don't need those special traders for that. But you're right, Paul. So today you have people taking advantage of people making a pilgrimage to the Kotel who might be going to the Kotel not just for tourist reasons or to see like a site that is 2,000 years old, but really going for spiritual reasons. And
Rabbi,
yes.
the Hertz Bible has that there shall be no more traffickers, the money-making merchant who exploited pilgrims to the sanctuary with the sale of animals and vegetables will disappear from the temple precincts.
Right. So Hertz is suggesting that it's so the Jewish Study Bible thinks it's this particular specific trader that's talking about. Hertz is talking about a more general kind of trafficker, whether it's a money lender or some other stuff that you would need for Jerusalem. So whatever it is, it's that context of there would be people whose livelihood was based on pilgrims coming to the city to fulfill either their own spiritual quest or to because it's the three holidays of the year. So people would make a living based on pilgrims who are coming 3 times a year and have stuff that was. Now, could you trust them that what they were selling was holy? So that would be an interesting question. Like, is it certified holy based on a Kohen who has ritually purified it, or does it say made in China, kind of thing, right? It's kind of like if you walk through the city of the market, if you enter the Jaffa Gate and walk through the Arab market to get to the Jewish quarter, you'll see all this olive wood stuff. And if you're Christian, there are stores set aside to have crucifixes, rosary beads, all these things that you can buy for holy objects. How holy are they? I mean, really, some of the stuff is made in China. And these same vendors are selling taluses and kippot, which also say made in China. So it's just, so you have to buyer beware when you're buying. So in other words, if you're going to Jerusalem, let's say, when travel opens up again and we'll have a trip to Israel, don't ever, ever, ever buy a talus in the Arab market, okay? You might, because it just doesn't make sense to buy something Jewish from somebody not Jewish, because they don't know what they're selling. But go to the Jewish quarter, and you would have you'd be more likely to find something that is made the right way. In other words, like how the tzitzit tied on a talus that's made in China. Is the tzitzit tied the right way? So these traders too, I'm sure, took advantage of these pilgrims who might assume, oh, you're living in Jerusalem, you're holy, so obviously your business is going to be holy too. So there could be an element of that Zechariah is referring to. It's not just that the whole land is going to be holy and we won't need these traders, that you don't need that Jerusalem will be on a higher sanctity than everything else, but that it's possible that the connivers, these what Hertz would be referring to it in his commentary, people taking advantage of other people won't be there then either.
One other point, Rabbi, traffickers is defined by Hertz as Canaanites.
Yeah, well, because their word here in Hebrew is Kanaani. V'lo yeh Kanaani od beveit Adonai tzvaot bayom ahu. So our translation doesn't translate it as Canaanite, but rather traders, right? And Hertz himself translates it as traffickers, but the Hebrew is Kanaani. So what's the point of the Kanaani in that? So that's the other thing about this. What's a Canaanite doing selling Jewish ritual objects, right? So that's another level to this. Yes, Jan, unmute yourself.
So I have a different Humash with a different translation,
Yeah.
And the translation is, on that day, there will no longer be Canaanite wood choppers and water drawers working in the house of Hashem, the God of hosts, because even the most aristocratic of Gentiles will be volunteering their own services.
So what edition of the Chumash is that? The
Chabad.
Art Scroll. Okay, yes. No, that's a good one, but that's like going way beyond. So understanding Canaanite here as the water drawers and wood choppers. So I don't know where these scholars get this idea from. Like, what is the role of the Canaanite in a temple precincts? Because the Torah certainly doesn't allow for anybody, not only not an Israelite, but not a Kohen, from entering into the temple precincts to do work there. So in other words, hiring out some of the tasks, like maybe making the vestments or drawing the water that is going to be used in the daily sacrifice, or chopping the wood that's going to be burned as the source of fire for the sacrifices on the altar. Can you really hire that out? And I don't really think so, but it's possible that in the time of the Second Temple, and maybe even the time of the First Temple, that the system became corrupt. And Kohanim saw that it was beneath them to engage in that menial labor, even though the Torah specifically says that it's supposed to be the Kohen who's taking out the trash from the previous day's sacrifices. That in the book of Leviticus, the portion Tzav talks about that the Kohen has to dress in a special outfit to clean up the ashes from the previous day's sacrifices on the altar, and clean it up and take it outside the camp and bury it there. So that was holy work too, taking care of the trash. So it's possible that what Zechariah could be referring to here is how the temple itself, the Kohanim themselves, became so corrupt and so snobbish that partially led to the destruction of the temples too. So so there's a lot here below the surface about this messianic era where there won't be any corruption anymore. The whole country, all the people, even all the animals are going to be in this holy state, so that there won't even enter into someone's mind the idea that there can be corruption. So any other thoughts or comments about this? Yes, Elizabeth.
There seems to be, and I think you mentioned earlier, that this is the time when Moshiach appears.
Yes.
And yeah, but where is that even referenced?
It's not mentioned in here in chapter 14. It's just based on context from other prophets in the Bible who describe similar scenes. So, which actually reminds me about Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives is key to, or is common in messianic visions that prophets have. So so again, Mount of Olives is on the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem. And the vision is that Elijah, the prophet from the book of Kings, who ascended to heaven in a fiery chariot. So the Bible doesn't describe his death. It describes his death as rising to heaven in a fiery chariot. So according to the rabbis, Elijah isn't dead. So that when we sing every Saturday night, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, to foretell the time of the Messiah, because the prophets say, other prophets say that Elijah is going to come back because he's still alive and bring the Mashiach with him. And where is he going to bring him from? The Mashiach, who's descended from King David, right? The Mashiach means the anointed one. That's literally what Mashiach means. So
Yeah.
Messiah is just an English way of saying Mashiach in Hebrew, because the becomes an H. And the double S represents the Shin. So Messiah is Mashiach, the anointed one, descended from King David. So Elijah will bring that descendant, and whatever generation it is, Elijah will know who the direct descendant is, who's going to be the new king, right? So Zechariah doesn't mention that here, but other prophets do. And he's going to be riding a white donkey from the Mount of Olives into the city of Jerusalem. So now on the Mount of Olives today, if you look directly across, where if you're on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, where the cemetery is, anywhere there, you look directly across, you look west to the eastern side of the old city, you'll see where there had been a gate. It's one of the 7 gates into the old city. And the Muslims themselves blocked up that gate. They closed that gate because when the Muslims, after the time of Muhammad, when the Muslims spread from the Arabian Peninsula to northern Africa and southern Europe, they got the land of Israel and built the mosque on the top of the Temple Mount, and they want to make it Muslim. So they closed up that gate because they knew of the Jewish reverence for that and the Jewish prayer for the Messiah. So if they stop up the gate, then the Messiah can't come, because the Messiah is supposed to enter into Elijah leading the Messiah, riding the white donkey from the Mount of Olives into that gate to then proclaim the new era of Judaism in the future. So if you close up the gate, then the Messiah can't come. And also, during the between years from 1948 to 1967, when Jordan had control over that part of Jerusalem, they
Desecrated the
ransacked.
cemetery, right?
Say that again?
Didn't they desecrate that cemetery?
Yes, they did. They used all the headstones as paving stones for highways. Yes, so that after 1967, the Jewish Cemetery Committee of the Mount of Olives Cemetery had a lot of work to do to try to find the records to remake all those headstones. So that's the and so that now the connection to the Christian Bible is, remember, early Christians were Jews. Jesus was Jewish. His followers were Jewish and just had a different vision for what their form of Judaism would be. So in the Christian Bible, Jesus, of course, if Jesus is the Messiah, then he has to be the Jewish Messiah, because that's the only version of the Messiah that they know because of the Bible. So if he's the Jewish Messiah, then that's why the Gospels write about him entering Jerusalem riding on a white donkey from the Mount of Olives. So read whatever gospel it is that describes him entering Jerusalem. He's riding on a white donkey from the Mount of Olives into the city of Jerusalem, fulfilling supposedly the prophetic visions of what the Messiah, who the Messiah will be. And that's why also one of the gospels has a genealogy of Jesus saying that he's a descendant of King David. Okay, so that all adds to bringing the vision of the prophets of the time of the Messiah to life in the time of the rabbis, in Jesus and his followers who proclaimed that he was the Messiah. And of course, the rest of the Jewish community, the rabbis, did not say that he was the Messiah. So if you're the Messiah, then you have to follow what the prophets say, because the prophets are speaking truth and they're speaking God's truth. So if this is the vision, then it has to come true. And if it's coming true, well, it has to be enacted in that way. And so did Jesus enter Jerusalem riding on a white donkey, or was that story written later and added to the stories of Jesus? I don't know. I'm not a
Right.
Christian Bible scholar to answer
I
that
wouldn't
question.
know. I wouldn't know either, and I also wonder whether he actually believed he was Messiah or not. You know,
That's a different question, right? So we really don't know.
Yeah.
We really don't know. So again, in non-Christian circles, we can be open and critical, not critical in a bad way, but critical in a scholarly way of this. Just as now, not all Jews are critical of the Bible in this open way. As non-Orthodox Jews, we are, and it doesn't affect our faith or the sanctity of the text. For some Christians, criticizing the words of the Christian Bible could be seen as exhibiting lack of faith or blasphemy.
Blasphemy.
Right. So I'm not. So I would suggest that criticizing the Bible is not blasphemy, but again, so it depends who you're talking to,
Right.
who's Christian, whether they're willing to be open to a sense of, let alone whether Jesus existed or not, as opposed to these questions: was Jesus married? Did he have a child? Did when did he live? What actually was the story? Was the Last Supper a Seder? What other meal was it? And entering Jerusalem with palm branches too might suggest that he was entering on Sukkot, which is a half a year away from Passover. So really, when was it that Jesus entered Jerusalem? Did he enter Jerusalem? What did it look like? Did he ride on a white donkey? All these questions. But the point is that the prophets had a vision of what the Messianic era was going to look like, what it's going to be like, and the Christian Bible had to make it so that Jesus fulfilled the prophetic vision.
Right. Yeah. I understand all that.
So it's just because our time is running out, I just want to say that what the rabbis also do with their Haftorah is not just find a section from the books of the prophets that has to do with that week's Torah portion or with that week's holiday, but also to teach a deeper lesson about it, so that when we're observing the holiday of Sukkot, usually we're looking back in history. We're remembering how during the desert wandering years, the people lived in booths or temporary structures, which is when we build a sukkah today, we're being reminded of the 40 years of wandering. We're also connected to the agricultural cycle in the land of Israel, that this is the time of the fall harvest. So we make that connection too. But then there are more broad spiritual connections to the power of water, right? And our life-giving element of nature that we need, rain, water, which is important. And also that instead of looking back, also the temporary structure is reminding us of the sukkah of peace that is in heaven. And we want God to bring down the sukkah of peace to protect us. So there's something spiritual about the sukkah as well that reminds us of being under God's protection. And so elevating these rituals that connect to history and to agricultural into a more deeper, independent spiritual meaning, and also by this Haftorah, looking forward to the future too, that the time of Sukkot will be a time when, in the time of the Messiah, we don't have to worry about living in a house. We don't have to worry about where our food is going to come from. It's going to be a time of great sanctity and protection from God always. So that's some of the other.
Rabbi, just one last question to me. When is the table going to be out for returning to Chumash?
It's out now. The Machzor, yes, it's out now.
What are the hours that the table is?
Regular office hours.
What hours?
Regular office hours, 9 to 5. You can come by anytime and drop it off. Okay?
9 to 5.
Yes, okay, so you can come today, come tomorrow, through Friday would be 9 to 1, but if you're coming in if you're coming today or tomorrow, you can just come by. Otherwise, you should email Jonathan to let him know that you're coming by, so to be sure that he's here to take it. Okay, I am stopping recording